many people in this world, they can feel lonely. They're alone. They feel uncomfortable and they feel perhaps that life is overwhelming. And they worry whether they really have the power to get through situations that they're facing. Physically speaking, there might be all kinds of issues for them due to past mistakes they've made, perhaps, and that caused them to be in a bad spot right now, currently. It can be in all kinds of ways. I actually don't really necessarily want to go into examples, but there's so many ways that we can screw up our own lives, and now we have to deal with the consequences of it, right? But then there's also, I guess, a much greater issue that's more subtle at the same time, is this feeling of being overwhelmed by the things that are happening inside your consciousness. Since throughout the years, I've literally had people tell me that they prefer that they would not think, that they could turn it off, that there would be no thoughts occurring in their minds, basically to go completely numb. And then in that, statement, in that way of living, they come to the conclusion that I should either take medication, apologize for that. They come to the conclusion I should either take medication or abuse it, or I should take some alcohol, abuse it, drugs, abuse it. So we start to numb our minds through all sorts of ways in order to try and escape our own thoughts. But was any of this foretold us? If we go to some ancient scriptures, in this case the Bible, was something like this foretold us? Because I would say that it was the case, and there are some verses that describe this, but perhaps they're not understood. So today I wanted to share with you just a few verses that you can find for yourselves in the first chapter of Jeremiah in the Bible, if you're curious about it. Now in it said, I noted these verses down. In it simply said this: before I formed you in the belly, I knew you, and before you came out of the womb, I sanctified you, and I ordained you a prophet unto the nations. Now then the response was, Lord, behold, I cannot speak, for I am but a child. But the Lord said unto me, say not, I am a child, for thou shalt go to all that I shall send thee, and whatsoever I command thee thou shalt speak. Be not afraid of their faces, for I am with thee to deliver thee, said the Lord. And then a little further on it was written, for behold, I have made thee this day a defenced city, and an iron pillar and brazen walls against the whole land, against the kings, against the princes thereof, against the priests thereof, and against the people of the land. And they shall fight against thee, but they shall not prevail. For I am with thee, said the Lord, to deliver thee. Now, if you read this initially and you take it completely superficially, it seems like it's talking about, it mentions here early on being ordained a prophet, so already people might then assume, that's definitely not about me personally, right? So, because they don't see themselves as a prophet necessarily, so already it's like, it's about somebody else. That's what you would superficially reason. Then it goes on about all these enemies and do not be afraid of their faces. So you're like, okay, it must be talking about certain people, in certain areas. In this case, the kings were of Judah, it's stated in the Bible at least. So then you go in that direction, and again, it doesn't really tell you a whole lot about yourself from that angle. But now let us take this inwardly and look at it spiritually through intuitive vision. So what it stated there is simply that God, of course, knew you before you were born, because you're a spiritual being. So that is the truth. You are a spiritual being that is now having this human experience. Now it stated that I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. Now you might say, I'm not a prophet, but here's what we are gonna get at. These nations, take them spiritually, they exist within yourself. These nations are all these different states of consciousness through which you go, whether they're good or bad. So here God says that I ordained you a prophet unto those nations. So making you a prophet over yourself. You're going to prophesize, you're going to talk God's word into your own very being to overcome all the negative stuff that's going on in there. So saying that, as we said earlier, that you do not want to think, for example, you want to escape your own thoughts, you want to run away from yourself. That's not what you're meant to do. You're meant to become a prophet unto the nations of your own consciousness, so over these states that you're going through, to actually express this higher spiritual power of yours to overcome this negativity that otherwise drags you down. So it went on here to say, to be not afraid of their faces. Well, again, it's just symbolism for all these negative states of mind. They have a particular way of feeling, and you could say looking, especially if you're dreaming. A nightmare, there's a particular look to it, a particular feel. And the nightmare might be about stuff that you were afraid of while you were awake, that you were disturbed by while you were awake. This happens all the time, especially to little children. They might have nightmares about something scary they saw in a movie, for example. They saw that while they were awake, and now in the dream world, it shows up again, perhaps even more scary for them. But again, it's just, be not afraid of their faces, for I am with thee. So this is where God states that he is with you all along, in order to overcome these states. And then he went on to say again in these other verses that it's about not being afraid of these kings, these princes, these priests, the people, and all of this superficially sounds like it's only about other people, and you're like, well, I don't know any kings, princes, priests. I do know some people, of course, but it must again not be about me. No, it is about you. It is about all of us. It's telling a story, and symbolically that needs to be perceived spiritually, that all these states of consciousness can be considered like kings, princes, priests, and people in general. Really, if you look at it like that, you understand that this is a great opening in the Bible of one of the books. It stated, they shall fight against thee. How does that happen? How do these states fight against you? Well, they're trying to drag you down. They're wearing you out. They're making you feel bad as long as you indulge in them. If you listen to those states of mind that are negative, especially, that are of limitations and of failure, being demoralized, they drag you all over the place. But it was also said that they shall not prevail against you, for I am with you, said the Lord, to deliver you. Now, for most people, this promise is not entirely fulfilled. God is always with everyone, because it is the very deepest nature of their own being. They were born from God's being. So they are God, essentially, but it is very deeply hidden behind the ego and all these thoughts and other layers that go on inside consciousness. But he said that these negative states will not prevail you. Well, so this is not being fulfilled for most people, because they already gave up on it, on actually pulling this off by trying to run away. But yet now become the prophet over these states. Understand that they all need to be guided into the light. You need to guide your own negative aspects of consciousness into the light, so that you can overcome all the negativity that they've been causing for you in your lifetime so far. If you do this, then everything will change for the better. You will no longer experience the same negativity that you have experienced up until that point. You will no longer be interested and willing to make the same mistakes that you've been making up until this point. Because if this is not done, you're only trying to hide from your own negativity and negative states, and that's no good. That's not how you fix them for real. You fix them by lifting them up into the light of consciousness, of wisdom, of this perspective of God awareness. So here it was foretold in the Bible that everyone born of a woman will face an army of enemies, and should not forget that God is with them. So if that would be understood, then people will realize the enemies are inside of their own minds. They are bringing me down, they're bringing you down. They cause anxiety and low self-esteem in life, and people go years of their entire life suffering from mental disorders because they were not told and helped to see that they are spiritual beings and God is with them to fix these problems. So we humans can easily see all things made by humans came out of the imagination, and so out of consciousness. The universe at large, we don't know the origin exactly, unless we grasp it must have come out of a cosmic consciousness or God itself. And then it means my physical body is only a reflection of an invisible body of mine that can never die, since it is not of this world, just like everything else coming from things that did not exist physically at first. So the whole salvation story lies in this. It has to become clear to all of us on where to actually look, and we look within. The salvation comes from within, and that's the beauty. If you understand that these negative states of mind are not meant to intimidate you, and that you actually have the power through your own I amness, through your own eternal beingness, your eternal awareness, you will pierce right through them and overcome them and lift them up if you have to. But you will overcome, you will conquer those negative states of the mind, so you no longer feel bad. It will stop you from being so anxious and having this low self-esteem potentially about yourself and life, because of all these negative states of mind that are, messing around with you from the inside. They're like this army that is dragging you all over the place, and you're going to have to become a prophet unto them, unto those nations full of weird stuff that's going on inside of you. That is what every child should have been taught the moment they were born, so that all these problems, as they grow up, as they face them, they don't feel overwhelmed by them anymore, because they know how to overcome them. And the power, they know where their power lies. It lies within them. They understand their own spiritual nature first and foremost. You will overcome all the physical issues that you face throughout your life. I see, it's a tragedy that this is not being taught to children most of the time. So then what happens is that most of them, when they're getting older and older, are also going through all these anxieties and worries of human life, and they all get overwhelmed by it to a certain extent, and in some tragic cases it just becomes too much and people start developing mental disorders, and again all these extreme issues that stops them from actually freely enjoying their lives. Isn't that sad? So I hope this message gave you something to think about concerning these verses in the Bible, that you start to understand that many of the things written in that book in particular, just like any other ancient scripture, is talking about what is happening in you and me, even in this day and age, thousands of years later. As shocking as it may seem, but that is really what it's all about. It's about the evolution of our own consciousness, the own awakening, us becoming aware of this unity we have with God, the Father, as they would write it. So with that being said, dear viewer, never forget that we are the dreamers.